Hi, I'm Christie Nicholson, and I'm here today with Dr. Jud Brewer in New York City at the BrainMind Forum. So to kick things off, I know you don't necessarily use the word mindfulness, but I was going to ask you, for you, what does mindfulness feel like?
Oh, what a great question. So, mindfulness is this concept that really gets at the embodied experience of like this curious presence. So that's what it feels like, is like no filter, no clouds, just intimate experience with whatever's happening. But this flavor, this ude, this hint of like this curiosity that just draws you into your experience more.
How did you get into that state or start practicing it? And maybe it might be the standard things that a lot of us think about, but how did you get to that place? Because that's a pretty special place.
Yeah, well, it started for me at the beginning of medical school. I started meditating actually my first day of medical school, way back in the day when I was really stressed out medical student. And I learned during boring medical school lectures, I could at least start to meditate and it felt like I was not wasting my time. And I was like, oh, well, this is actually pretty useful. And so I shifted my entire career after my MD, PhD program to studying mindfulness. And somebody literally told me, a fellow resident at the time, said, you're gonna kill your career doing this, because it was like, there was not a lot of research at the time. It was considered rainbows, unicorns, candles, and incense. But I just had this sense from my direct experience. I was like, this is so helpful. And then in seeing patients in the clinic, they were actually speaking the same language that I was learning from the Buddhist psychologists. And I was thinking, this cannot be a coincidence. So I just took the plunge and I said, I'd rather fail doing something that I'm really interested in than maybe succeed doing what I know how to do, molecular biology and things like that. And I'm so glad I took that plunge, because there was so much to learn. And over the last 20 years, we've learned a lot, and more importantly, been able to translate a lot of that into helping patients.
You mentioned that word language. They were speaking the same language. What's that about?
Oh, craving, clinging. I'm an addiction psychiatrist, so the whole thing about craving and how they were really sucked into these cycles of craving. Well, there was a guy named the Buddha who described the same thing, these cycles of suffering based on craving, and he figured a way out.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of anyone coming through it through that way and seeing that connection. I wanted to talk a little bit, just get it right into Through the Hunger Habit, the most recent book that I think it launched earlier this year?
January 2024.
So I love that you say it this way. This is not a diet book pretending not to be a diet book. So I'm wondering about, it's about not resisting our impulses. And that's really interesting to me, because it's like, sometimes a therapist might say to you, just go with it. Just don't, at the very moment that you're like, that's the last thing I feel like doing at all. Yeah, totally. Willpower doesn't work, but kindness does, kindness to ourselves or acceptance. Can you really, dig into that a bit?
Yeah, so whether I put on my neuroscience hat as a neuroscientist or I put on my therapeutic hat as a psychiatrist, our brains don't work through willpower. Sorry to break it to folks that think, that have been duped by that in the past, but if you take a neuroscience approach, that's not how behaviors form, and that's not how you break bad habits. So we studied, taking first I failed a lot in my clinic, taking what I learned in residency and trying to apply it, like, just stop smoking, just stop overeating. And my patients were like, yeah, I've tried, I've failed. Yeah. So I was like, okay, this is not working. Let's look at the science to see what we missed, and then let's study it. And so what I learned was that our brains learn to do things that are rewarding, and they learn to not do things that aren't rewarding. And the key ingredient for both of those is awareness.
The first thing.
Yes, that's the first thing. And I was like, oh, awareness. I've heard something about, oh yeah, meditation. That's what I was learning, to be aware during my meditation practice. And so I could start to apply these practices and study them in rigorous randomized controlled trials to see how much awareness could actually help people change behavior. So just as an example, we did this study with our Eat Right Now app, which is highlighted in the hunger habit, where we had people pay attention as they overate, right? It only took 10 to 15 times of them overeating for that reward value dropped below zero, meaning that they were no longer enchanted with this overeating, and then they could naturally start to shift that behavior.
So I do want to talk just about that, because getting curious is similar to that awareness. And you have this wonderful 4-step process. Notice the urge, so that's the craving. Get curious or become aware. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say get curious is bringing awareness in, because when we're curious, we're naturally aware of something.
Right, and then letting go, and then you repeat. I feel like the getting curious is one of the hardest things and challenges to get over. When you're craving something or when you're angry at someone, again, you don't want to stop and go, I wonder why. You just want to be like, I really don't like this, or I really just give me the donut.
Yeah.
So how long does it take? I mean, you just mentioned it happens quite quickly.
Well, there's a piece that turbocharges that letting go, and the letting go comes from becoming disenchanted with the behavior. And so as we get curious about what we get from the behavior itself, so if we want that donut, I say go ahead and eat the donut, right? Because we're going to do it anyway. And I say pay attention as you eat it and see what you get from it.
Okay.
So bring that process in and explore, was it worth the donut? And sometimes it's like, yeah, that was great. I was hungry, donut, fine, no problem. But when we're like, third donut, probably didn't need that third donut. That's where we bring that awareness in and start to explore, what was it like? And not think, I shouldn't have eaten that third donut, but really feel into our body, what does third donut feel like sitting in my stomach? And our stomach's like, dude, really? Third donut?
Yeah.
And that really is what shifts our behavior, because we get disenchanted. And we got to link, the behavior and the result. Third donut, gut bomb.
Right.
And that gut bomb says, hey, that's not very rewarding. And our brain updates that reward value, and we start to shift the behavior. Notice how there's no willpower involved in that, just awareness. Right. So the way I think of this is our feeling body is much stronger than our thinking brain, right? Because we can think, I shouldn't eat the third donut, or we can feel, this is what third donut felt like.
It just seems almost effortless in a sense. I mean, the awareness is still there, but I didn't catch that part about, look, knock yourself out, which I've heard from some therapists, like, just keep going with it. And I'm thinking, what? You're kidding me.
Well, as long as they apply awareness, they can't say just keep going with it, because then somebody's just going to keep going with the old habit. What I say is, hey, keep going with it, but pay attention. So my patients who want to quit smoking, they walk out of my office and they're like, my doctor just told me to smoke. And I say, yeah, smoke, because you're going to do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
Pay attention as you smoke. They come back and they're like, wow, that tasted like crap. And I'm like, yes! There you go. And that's where that disenchantment builds.
And so it truly means acceptance is everything. Yeah. It's the, I also want to get into habit forming, which is part of this. This is the structure for it. But I really loved your Alan Watts quote that you mentioned sometimes is, ego, the self which we believe to ourselves to be, our beliefs, is nothing but a pattern of habits. And then you mention habits forming are almost like knowing it in your bones. So we're nothing but a set of habits, but then it's also something that has to be really internalized.
Yeah, it can really feel like that. And that feeling it in our bones was actually a pilot tester for our Unwinding Anxiety app, where somebody was pilot testing it and wrote me a very articulate email saying, I feel like this anxiety is deeply etched in my bones, right? And so that's how identified people often are with whatever the behavior is. And in this person's case, it was that anxiety. She's like, I am anxious, right? I'm an anxious person. It's deeply etched in my bones. And that's what Watts talks about, where he says, who we believe ourselves to be, that's nothing but a pattern of habits. So one thing that my lab explored was, hey, can anxiety actually be driven like a habit? That feeling of anxiety triggers the mental behavior of worrying. And that worrying is, I'm doing something about my anxiety, which ironically is just feeding back and making us more anxious. So that feeds that cycle of habit formation, which can even be the habit of anxiety. And so we can draw upon what Watts was saying and say, hey, we can recognize even this feeling of something being deeply etched in our bones as a habit that we are driving. So we're doing that etching process ourselves. And if we're doing it, we can stop doing it.
Habits really are a form of identity. And so when you change even the sense and notion of I'm not an anxious person, that really does make a difference when you start identifying as such. So it's How long is the range of time that it takes before you start identifying with the self that you are hoping to achieve?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say typically it takes months for people, depending on how deeply etched it is. And in that process of transformation, I've often, and I would say probably more often than not, seen people get really freaked out by the process. Because whether it's anxiety, I remember a patient saying, "Oh, I don't know what to do. Like in these non-anxious periods, I get anxious that I'm not anxious." Right? Right, because that's the habit. I know how to be anxious, and here's something new.
Yeah.
So our brain says, "Oh, this is different," and what our brain is saying, "Hey, different could be dangerous, so I need to check for danger." And if we're in the habit of saying, "Oh, this is dangerous," as compared to different, then we're going to run back to our comfort zone. So here, even the process of change, we can recognize, oh, this feels uncomfortable because it's different, and we can ask a simple question like, is this different versus is this dangerous?
Words matter.
Words definitely matter. That's how we interpret our world.
Right. Yeah. There's another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is kind of an interesting thing. I like asking scientists this question. So, what do you believe to be true, but cannot prove?
Oh, what a great question. What do I believe to be true but cannot prove? Well, what comes off the top of my head is this awareness. Like this awareness is something that we cannot touch because it is simply awareness. And it may not even be limited to, we may be vehicles of awareness, this physical body, but there may be, this awareness that's beyond the physical body that people get tastes of, whether they're using psychedelics or in deep meditative states or things like that. But that is something that's ineffable, is really hard to prove scientifically.
Is that linked to consciousness of sorts, or no?
Depends on who you talk to, right? There are lots of debates about consciousness, and I think a lot of people link awareness to consciousness. Like without awareness, is there consciousness?
Do you?
Do I?
Link them?
I just try to stay out of those. I'm a very pragmatic person.
Right.
So I think of it as like, is this argument going to be helpful for my patients? And typically people arguing over consciousness, not as helpful for my patients. So I focus more on things like habit change.
Right. What is one thing you wished you really understood?
The mind.
Do you feel like what's still left for you to understand in your mind?
Everything. I mean, that's a huge. I feel like the more we learn, that we don't know anything. Yeah. And so the mind, like the embodied mind, for example, it's like, where is awareness and where is the mind? Often people think it's because we have these two eyes that are a focal point of our world, and so we preference vision over many other things. We think, oh, the mind is back here. So, just the mind, there's so much to explore there.
Yeah, neurons all the way through our body.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to talk about BrainMind a little bit and just ask you, you've been part of the organization and we've been here over these last couple of days. What do you find remarkable about this organization, BrainMind?
Well, I just love the setup where it brings together this, it's like a critical mass. I think of this as nuclear fission, right? You've got to bring enough uranium bricks together for there to be an explosion. And you need uranium and you need proximity. And so we've got these brilliant minds all together, curated, coming together where you see this explosion of ideas. And a lot of it is because people are leaving their egos at the door and they're saying, this is so exciting. I don't need to try to puff up my chest or prove something or show people that I'm great. It's like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And so we can lean in collectively in this collective consciousness of like, oh yeah, let's help the world as compared to let's help my ego or my career. I love it. I absolutely love it.
I feel the same. I've found that there's not a lot of alpha. It's really the egos are left at the door and we're all super kind and sharing and collaborative. One last thing, what is your ask to the public?
My ask to the public is that we learn the power of curiosity and kindness. And this day and age, people just haven't tasted kindness, the sweetness, the pureness of kindness, whether it comes in authenticity or just simple acts of generosity, and don't see how powerful that is to really transform the world. You know, I think of this Buddhist quote where the Buddha said something like, if people only knew the power of generosity, they wouldn't go a single meal without sharing it with another. So this is what I want people just to be exploring themselves, is like just how powerful kindness is and how much that can help us band together to help the world.
What's a small step they can take to figure out what kindness feels like?
Open the door for someone without expecting anything in return and see what that feels like.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer. It was great talking with you today.
Thank you.